Hey there, this is Natalie, and well, if you've seen my Greed IF video or my video about Scarf Donna and Echidna, you've seen my white-haired greed form avatar before. But for this video, for reasons that will become apparent as we delve into the Gluttony IF route, not only has my hair turned white, but my left eye has also gone a bit weird. Plus, I can now see dead people. I'm sure everything will be back to normal for the next video. So, this is the Gluttony IF video, but unfortunately, unlike with the Pride IF and the Greed IF, it is absolutely impossible for me to cover any of this in a way that's going to avoid spoilers for people who aren't up to at least about chapter 78 of Arc 6 yet. You can get away without having read the new chapters from 2020, though you totally should at least check out some summaries. I'm writing this just after the final chapter of Arc 6 was released, and the climax of this arc has been just full of big things. I'll have a video about some of the biggest mysteries we've been left with at the end of the arc very soon. But yeah, sadly, making a summary and analysis of the Gluttony IF route that's safe for anime onlys or people who haven't reached Arc 6 yet is literally impossible, given the point where this story branches off from the main narrative is in Arc 6. The character Subaru has as his only ally in this IF route is one who isn't introduced until Arc 6, plus a lot of the most important stuff that happens relates to the location and plot of Arc 5. I will do my best to make it possible for people who are watching this who aren't caught up but want spoilers to follow it, as I usually do in my videos about stuff from later arcs of the web novel. But that will involve explaining one of the biggest twists in Arc 6, so we're not talking little lore or new character mentions, it's proper big stuff. So turn back now if you don't want to know things yet, and maybe check out the Greed or Pride IF videos instead. If you're sticking around, please subscribe to my channel and turn on the notifications to see all kinds of stuff about ReZero and occasionally other anime, including theories and analysis, web novel readings, and some lighter stuff. Also, let me know which IF route or other ReZero side story you want me to cover next time I feel like making a big, beefy side content video. So, with all of that out of the way, let's get started with the ReZero Gluttony IF route, which is also known as Tsugihagu, or patching together life in another world. The story begins with a character we've never seen before, a 14-year-old girl named Amue Sears. Amue is being asked by a man if she knows his name. As the scene continues, it becomes clear that Amue is terrified, that this question feels to her to be the most important she's ever been asked. She sees her own reflection in the eyes of the man talking to her, and she looks like she's aged dozens of years instantly. It's clear that something is very wrong here. The terrified girl answers the man eventually, saying that no, she doesn't know his name. She's telling the truth. He leaves her behind, and we're told that Amue is left all alone, as the only surviving member of her village. In this first scene, we're not even told that it's Subaru asking the question, and the situation in this rural village, far from the capital where news takes days to arrive, only becomes truly apparent at the end. But there's this growing eeriness throughout the whole thing that makes for a jarring lurch in tone when we see the next scene. Here, Subaru is travelling somewhere and he's preparing lunch for the whole gang. Beatrice, Emilia, Ram, Meili and Julius are all here, everyone involved in Arc 6 essentially, other than the artificial spirit Echidna, also known as Scarf Donna, who at this point in the story is possessing Anastasia's body. We'll see her later. They're all having some fun banter about mayonnaise, perhaps apt for the Gluttony IF. These characters are all being their usual selves, and it feels like some general ReZero slice of life type content. That is, until Shaula arrives. Shaula, if you're watching this for spoilers, is a beautiful, scantily clad woman with long black hair in a scorpion tail design, who believes Subaru is her master, even though her master was actually Flugel, and she's been awaiting his return for 400 years. Shaula isn't really human, and she has a strange personality, where literally all she cares about is her master. She'll give her own life for him without a second thought, and will follow his orders without question. She also likes to glomp him and tries to seduce him on the regular, but Subaru always treats this with annoyance. Devoted as he is, even in the confused state we shall soon see that he's in this if route, to Emilia. To give you an idea of what interactions with Shaula go like, here's some dialogue from this very scene. Subaru says, "Also, don't go grabbing the arms of people in the middle of cooking. What would you do if I ended up burning my hand?" Shaula, "If that were to happen, I'd gently lick the affected part. I'd lick it and lick it day and night without letting go." Subaru, "That wouldn't stop it from swelling." Still, there's a lot more to Shaula than sauce, but I won't recap everything we know about her here. I just wanted to give you enough of an idea about her to follow this story if you're not on Arc 6 yet and are watching this for spoilers. Shaula initially appears to simply interrupt the general larking around Subaru and the others are doing to give him an update where she's been scouting around, but Subaru seems oddly annoyed at her arrival, the reason being that it took his attention away from Emilia's smile. This seems like a bit of an overreaction. Surely he can just look back to Emilia, right? But then the scene ends with it being revealed that Subaru is only cooking for 2 people, himself and Shaula. The others were never truly there. In the next scene, we start to learn more about what's actually going on here. Subaru's walking somewhere with Shaula, only Shaula, and yet as he walks along he talks to the others, Ram first, then later Emilia. Emilia tells him he should be nicer to Shaula, which makes him feel awkward, given it's come from the girl he says he thinks he knows how he feels about. But Emilia, who we know isn't really there, says, I guess, maybe. Sorry, of course I'm lonely too, but I think it's pointless if you're always moping about it. After all, I'm already..." She's cut off, and Subaru doesn't want to hear the rest of her line anyway, but we get the distinct impression the next word was going to be dead. What causes the interruption is a dragon carriage passing by, which stops after seeing Subaru and Shaula. The driver seems to know Subaru, but Subaru can't remember him. Subaru can't remember anything since arriving in this world, other than what he's learned so far on what he now calls his journey of self-discovery. This is the name he gives the journey he is indeed taking in the Gluttony IF route, as he speaks to the man in front of him, who reminds Subaru that he is Regin Suin, Otto's brother, who met Subaru when he visited their village with Otto previously. This Subaru does not have any true memories of Otto, but he certainly knows who he is, from what he's heard from his deceased companions. During their conversation, Regin becomes very concerned about Subaru and suggests, practically insists, that Subaru comes to his village and stops by his clinic. Subaru doesn't know Regin's job though, and Regin is even more worried as he has to remind him that he is basically a ground dragon veterinarian, hence why he has a clinic. I can't blame Regin for being weirded out by this. I mean, you'd think if you were a dragon doctor, you'd be used to people remembering that as like the main thing about you. Still, now we learn more about what's going on here in the Gluttony IF route, as it says, "You're quite the good guy. Your brother seems to be a good guy too." That's why, from hereafter, their first reunion would also be terrible. By no means was it something that he'd derive pleasure from or look forward to. Shaula, "Present. What's up, master?" "Don't hurt him." And this is Subaru ordering Shaula to kill Regin, which she does by instantly blasting his head to nothing. Shaula is actually an incredibly strong killing machine, something else you'll be well aware of if you've read Arc 6. Shaula also destroys the dragon carriage and kills the ground dragon in her excitement, then is tasked with hiding the evidence. Subaru and Shaula then make their way to Regin's village, which he told Subaru that he'd once visited with Otto, and it's heavily implied that he kills everyone there. Now the scene changes to Subaru in the Taygeta library at the Pleiades Watchtower, and it becomes fully apparent what's going on here, and where this scenario diverged from the regular ReZero plot. The first reunion Subaru referred to before he killed Regin Suin is basically the mission he's on in this story. He intends to have his first reunion with everyone who knows anything about him, where he will murder them. Not out of hatred or malice, but because when they're dead, Subaru can visit the Taygeta library in the Pleiades Watchtower, which is home to the Books of the Dead. The Books of the Dead contain the memories of the deceased, which are filtered off from their souls when their souls are recycled by Odd Lagna. They're not such simple things as biographies that you can just learn about a person's life from. You're only able to read the book of a person you knew, and when you do, you basically relive the most important experiences of their lives. Their memories can become fused with you. At least this is something that happened to this Subaru in the normal route of Arc 6 when he read Meili's Book of the Dead in a loop where she died. He not only came to understand her, but also had a version of Meili in his head as part of himself, who could talk to him. It's possible that this isn't a normal feature of the books, however, and only happens in Subaru's case due to him having a gluttony witch factor inside him from the third witch cult Sin Archbishop of Gluttony, Rui Arneb, which is something I'll explain at the end of the story. It's unclear whether that's why Meili's book affects Subaru like this in normal Arc 6, or whether that's a thing that can happen with the Books of the Dead in general, but it doesn't seem to have this effect on Julius when he reads a book, or on Subaru prior to the point where he develops his amnesia, and we later find out gains this gluttony witch factor. This business with Rui Arneb and the witch factor of gluttony is something from normal Arc 6 that does very much affect what's happening here in the Gluttony IF, but is never plainly revealed in the IF story itself, which is why I'll go deeper into it at the end. This kind of fusing of the personalities, though, is what's happened to all of Subaru's companions in this story other than Shaula, who's giving him the means to actually commit all this murder. Subaru somehow killed Beatrice, Emilia, Julius, Meili and Ram and read their books, and now they're with him, as part of him. It's Subaru's intention to keep on killing and reading more books until he can patch together who the Natsuki Subaru he's forgotten was, a Natsuki Subaru he's convinced, owing to the way all of these people love and admire him, must have been some kind of superhero in the time lost from his memories, and who he believes he must find the secret to becoming once more if he is to be able to live out the rest of the story here. This Subaru plans that when this is complete, there will be time for the second reunion, when he will end his life and return by death, with everybody back and alive, and his old self, the Natsuki Subaru these people actually want, restored. The most tragic thing is, this Natsuki Subaru has only seen one checkpoint, and so perhaps does not understand that the return by death checkpoints may move, and maybe he'll be stuck in a time where none of these deaths can be undone. If you've read Arc 6, you'll know roughly where this IF route diverges from the normal story, as there is a loop where the amnesiac Subaru does have something like this exact plan, at least beginning with killing those in the tower and reading their books. It seems that if he had done this, the knowledge he got wouldn't have been sufficient, and this IF scenario would have played out. It's unclear how he managed to keep leaving the tower and going back to it, what happens with the trials and all of that, but perhaps this will become clearer as we see what comes next in the fallout from normal Arc 6 and we find out more about the tower itself. Or perhaps it's something unique to this Subaru who, as I said, has been tampered with by Rui Arneb in ways I'll talk about at the end, and so isn't quite the same Subaru who entered the tower and started the trials. For now, we just know that this Subaru is going out and killing with Shaula, returning to the Pleiades Watchtower to read the Books of the Dead, and then going out and killing some more. And he's also become very strategic in his methods, consulting with his ever-growing collection of dead friends and acquaintances. In the library, Shaula finds the new books for Subaru from the last people they killed, and Subaru talks to Emilia, or the shade of Emilia that's now part of him, about how when his plan is complete, it will all go back to normal again. He's told all of them this, it seems, and they trust him. Whether he can tell these echoes of dead people inside of himself about return by death is unclear, but he has told them this is all part of a plan that will make everything okay again, and they all seem to bear him no ill will, and are counting on him to get things done. This only makes this Subaru, constantly in the shadow of the real Natsuki Subaru they care about, and desperate to learn how to become him, even more miserable. Next, there is a callback to the Meili Book of the Dead scenes from regular Arc 6, but it is kind of subverted. I'll read you this bit as it is because you'll definitely understand this if you've read the fairly iconic Murder Becomes a Habit passages in Arc 6 of the web novel. Murder becomes a habit. This was one of the phrases the famous detective Hercule Poirot left the world with. The meaning of this phrase didn't refer to a person who had killed a human being and then suddenly woke up with a preference for murdering people, who then kept repeating the crime to satisfy their cravings. It referred to someone who once solved their problems by murder, and for them, whenever another problem arose, they would think about trying to break through the problem through murder again. Murder becomes a habit. But if killing really was linked to the solution of the problem, could it even be said that it was the result of murder becoming a habit? Couldn't it be said that it wasn't that murder became a habit, but rather that unavoidable circumstances sprang forth? The situation wasn't that of adding murder as an option because it had become a habit, but rather that there was no option other than to murder. Perhaps saying things like murder had become a habit wasn't possible anymore. Murder becomes... To hell with Hercule Poirot. Fictional detectives needn't talk so pretentiously. How could he have said it as if he saw through everything? The reasons behind every situation, behind everything, are tangled together in various complications with multiple layers of complexity to them. Don't disregard those things and make light of them by trying to apply those words to everything. Murder. This was the only way when there was no other. It was the most logical when there was no other way to reach the correct answer. That's why it wasn't murder becomes a habit, but rather, only murder becomes the answer. Yeah, that's right. Of course it was. Only that was the answer. Only that was the correct answer. Only that would cut through the hopelessness of this dead end. It was a last resort. Next, we hear the thoughts of the dead about how much they love and depend on Subaru, to which Subaru responds, I know that you all love Natsuki Subaru a lot. I know that you all really care about Natsuki Subaru. I know that the Natsuki Subaru that saved you all is a Superman. I'm aware that everything the Natsuki Subaru that saved you all did has been ruined. That's why I have to get him back. If I can at least get him, if I can at least get Natsuki Subaru back, if I can at least do that, everything will turn out well. It'll all turn out well. I have to keep going. Now the scene changes and we see Echidna, the artificial spirit Echidna who used to be Anastasia's scarf but is currently inhabiting Anastasia's body as a result of events in Arc 5, who it seems managed to escape Subaru's murder spree at the Watchtower and made it to Pristella, the city that was under siege from the witch cult in Arc 5, and which is where many of the characters who didn't take part in the expedition to the tower in Arc 6, such as Otto and Garfiel, still remained. Echidna meets up with other key people and tells them that Natsuki Subaru went crazy in the tower and killed Emilia and the others, with the help of the very Shaula they'd gone there in search of. We see Reinhard, Otto and Garfiel react to this, none of them wanting to believe it, but Otto being the first to understand that it probably is true, given why else would Echidna have returned alone and said it was so. Echidna also announces that she, or at least Anastasia, will be standing down from the royal election. It will be very hard for Anastasia to come back under the current circumstances, as while we didn't know this when this If story came out, we now know from a chapter released just last week that her waking up is tied to Julius, and in this version of events, Julius is dead. Echidna talks to Ricardo, who, if you don't remember, is that nice wolfman guy from Anastasia's mercenary group who we saw in season 1, and who's kind of like a father figure to Anna, as well as to Mimi and her brothers. She says that she will take the necessary steps to break up Anastasia's company and find people new jobs, and Ricardo says that he will continue to find a way to save Anastasia. But as they're talking, this happens. The very next instant, a torrent of water rushed towards them with tremendous force, engulfing Echidna, Ricardo, and the city, and then continuing on to wash away absolutely everything. The flood, which the witch cult had botched up, now once again assailed the Watergate city, which had previously escaped disaster. Indeed. In Arc 5, the witch cult had threatened to flood the city of Pristella, which was designed as a kind of watery trap, and which had been where the Witch of Pride, Typhon, had died by drowning 400 years before. Subaru and all of the Royal Selection factions had all banded together to fight off the witch cult's sin archbishops and prevent this flood. But now Subaru and Shaula are watching from above as the flood they caused wipes out the city, and many more of Subaru's friends and acquaintances. As he watches, we see that Subaru is now joined by some new ghosty friends, in the form of people from Roswaal's mansion. Roswaal himself, Petra and Frederica are all there, so Subaru had at some point swung by the mansion for some killing during the planning of this city wipeout. Subaru announces that he aims to take on the most troublesome opponent of those he expects to have survived the flood first. Now the scene changes to Garfiel and Otto. Garfiel managed to grab Otto and get to safety, but Garf is freaking out. Otto shouts at him that they basically need to keep it together and carry on, because it's only them left. Then Otto is grazed by what seems to be a snipe from Shaula. Garfiel races off to fight her and puts up an admirable, if doomed, attempt. He becomes distracted when Subaru calls out to him, because Garfiel never truly believed his captain could have done the things Echidna had said, but the man he sees where Subaru stands, well, Garf doesn't even recognise him. Shaula takes advantage of the lapse in concentration and kills him. Otto sees this from a distance and is desperately trying to do something to escape. He considers how he might use his divine protection of animal whispering, but even the rats have drowned. Then a voice is talking to him, and he looks in horror upon the state of Natsuki Subaru. We now realise that Subaru's hair has turned white, and his left eye has gone a misty, hazy colour. It's with this left eye that he can see his dead companions, who nobody else can see. And as for his hair, it doesn't state it in the story, but it's understood that the change in colour was from the shock he experienced when he read Beatrice's Book of the Dead. Subaru tells Otto, though, that these changes just kind of happened. Otto now talks through what he thought had been Subaru's plan, saying that while it was smart of him to let Echidna escape the tower so she would gather the key people here in Pristella, where he could cause a natural disaster that would wipe out many of the people he knew regardless of their strength, he believes Subaru has failed in what he must surely have been trying to do, by not going straight for Reinhard. Subaru says that it was actually by chance at first that Echidna had survived, but when he'd realised that this situation in Pristella could be created, he didn't go after her. He then reveals that Otto was wrong. The person Subaru viewed as the most troublesome, who he had created this whole flood to kill, wasn't Reinhard. Reinhard was someone he thought he would have to kill eventually, but a low priority to him. The person Subaru thought was the most troublesome, owing to the testaments of all of his dead companions who knew the Natsuki Subaru he wants to piece together best, was Otto himself. Subaru is as stunned that Otto didn't realise this as Otto is to hear it. Subaru asks all of the dead characters around him, from Roswaal through to Emilia and Birko one by one, who the most troublesome guy is, and each one answers that it's Otto, though of course Otto only sees Subaru talking to himself. Otto says that it pretty much sucks to be told he was the most valued in life before being killed, and Subaru tells him that he was always the one the people of the Emilia camp valued most. And then Shaula, covered in Garfiel's blood, appears, and after a quick bit of banter with Subaru, she kills Otto in a single hit. Now Subaru looks down from the rooftop where he's standing into the flood, where the remaining part of Otto's body is sinking. He hears a voice behind him, and of course, it's Reinhard. Reinhard, somehow, in spite of the flood, has kept his hair and clothes dry. Subaru briefly wonders why Reinhard isn't wet. Reinhard then asks Subaru why he did this, after everything he did to try to save the city of Pristella, and he questions whether Shaula, who's standing behind him, had deceived him. Shaula remarks to Subaru that Reinhard reminds her of Reed Estrella, who Shaula is very scared of, and Subaru tells her that Reinhard is Reed's descendant. This worries even Shaula, but Subaru's already said that he won't fight Reinhard like this, only partly prepared. Reinhard says he'll put an end to this now as proof of the friendship they had. Subaru makes a remark about the time they crashed a wedding together, which was in Arc 5 when they rescued Emilia from being forced to marry Regulus Cornelius, something Subaru's heard about from the dead Emilia. He then says that while he will have to kill Reinhard to get back the piece of Natsuki Subaru in his memories, it won't be today, and he reveals the plan he had to get Reinhard out of his way. Shaula sends a snipe of white light in the direction of the building where Felt has taken shelter, causing Reinhard to immediately dash off to save her. Next to Subaru, the dead form of Roswaal, who came up with this plan, comments that keeping what you care about close by is the same as revealing your weakness. Shaula and Subaru are able to get away, but first Subaru promises Reinhard, as he's jumping away, that he's not as omnipotent as he thinks, and one day Subaru will definitely kill him. Now the scene changes to Amue, the girl from the first scene, whose whole village had been slaughtered. Reinhard and some other guards from the Knight's Order have come to investigate the incident, but it's taken 2 days for them to get news of the event and get there, so for 2 days Amue had been alone, surrounded by the corpses of her family and the other villagers. Reinhard asks her about the attackers, though while the other guards may be suspecting the witch cult, he's already certain that it was Subaru and Shaula. Amue says that yes, it was a man and a woman, and that the man had seemed like he was talking to someone else. Now I'll read you the end of this scene, because it's better to get the full effect of what Reinhard says to understand just how much having his friend Subaru commit these atrocities is disturbing him. You have my gratitude for providing me this information. The Knight Order should deal with this right away. Do you have any relatives other than your family? Amue's fingers gently grasped at Reinhard's trouser cuff as he spoke to her with kindness. As if frightened of him leaving her, Amue's face had turned to disbelief at her own action. However, given her mental state, that too was natural. She'd lost her family and her hometown too. How much suffering awaited her from here on out? If he could be useful in distracting her from her anxiety in the midst of this, then... All right, I'll stay with you until your safety is ensured. So I want you to rest assured, because no one that wishes you harm will get close to you anymore. Sorry, I'm really sorry. You needn't apologize, since you didn't do anything wrong. Taking her hand, Reinhard silently thought back to the guy who'd caused this horrendous spectacle, as he watched Amue once again starting to burst into heavy tears. Are you satisfied with this? Does it fulfill you? What on earth do you see reflected in your eyes? I just don't understand. Subaru. Reinhard muttered out the name of the person who wasn't here and closed his eyes. The figure which was reflected behind Reinhard's eyelids was a friend who would eventually come to kill him. That friend would likely go to any means for that. He was a friend that eventually Reinhard would have to kill by his hand. Now we see Subaru, and he's surrounded by all of his friends. That plan to leave that one little girl alive so Reinhard would stay with her and delay pursuing him, well, that was Otto's idea. Otto and Garfiel, even Anastasia, who's back to her old self, which does raise the question of what happened to Scarfdonna when Anastasia died, have joined Subaru's side, and there's an eerie scene of cute interactions between all of the characters, before, just as she did earlier, Emilia talks to Subaru about Shaula, saying that she looks lonely and Subaru has to take good care of her. Because he'd promised this to Emilia, and he knows, just as he learned before he lost his memories, just how important promises are to Emilia Tan, he leaves the company of his ghosts and talks to his devoted killing machine. Shaula asks him if his fun time where he goes off and grumbles to himself like he's having fun has finished, reminding Subaru just how crazy he probably looks when he's talking to all of the dead people in his head. He takes a moment to appreciate just how important Shaula actually is to him. He can get help from all of his dead friends to come up with plans and to learn information, but it's always Shaula's strength he needs to call on when these first reunions actually happen. And so he asks her how she wants it to go in the end, when, after he's finally killed Reinhard, the last person on his list, he'll kill Shaula too, to take back the memories of Natsuki Subaru that she too, of course, holds. Now, it's worth noting to those of you who know a bit more about Shaula than Subaru or any of his friends know at the point where this Ifrit deviated from the main story, that Shaula is in fact a witch beast created by Daphne, just like the white whale and the great rabbit. And so whether she would even have a Book of the Dead, or whether those aren't created for things like that, we don't actually know. It's hard to even guess what type of souls they're created for. I mean, clearly Beatrice had one, but we don't know if the artificial spirit Echidna did. The list of people Subaru's read the books for and now has with him in the final scene is Emilia, Beatrice, Ram, Julius, Meili, Petra, Frederica, Roswaal, Rom, Garfiel, Otto, Anastasia, Ricardo, Hetaro, TV, Mimi, Kiritaka, and Liliana. I mean, if you've read Arc 5, you can probably imagine the ordeal of reading Liliana's book and then having her popping out and talking to you in your head. Still, whether that list means he just hasn't read the artificial spirit Echidna's book yet, or she didn't have one, being for some reason different from Beatrice, is unclear. So who knows whether Shaula as an artificially created witch beast would have one. Still, Subaru here doesn't know about her true form, so he's assuming she will have a book, and it's one he will need to complete patching together the original Natsuki Subaru. Shaula, however, tries to explain that all she cares about is Master, him. Shaula doesn't know the same distinction Subaru thinks the others do between him and their Natsuki Subaru, who he still believes must be some amazing superhero from how they speak of him. She just sees her master, who she loves, and she's fine to die for him. This kinda moves Subaru, who for once lets Shaula cling onto his arm. He tells her he will kill her last, and she seems genuinely pleased to be able to say she'll be his last woman. He tells her not to joke about such things, but Shaula wasn't joking. And then the story ends with a refrain that's been repeated over and over between the scenes of this Ifrit story, finally completing itself. Patching together, continuing to form its shape. Patching together, continuing to mould its shape. Patching together, continuing to fill in the colours. Patching together, and continuing towards bringing himself closer to completion. Patching together, there's too much to be patched together. Even if he kept patching it together so that the original form became unrecognisable, he could still patch together a new one. Patching together and continuing to live on. Patching together and continuing to live on until the day comes where he would die, and he would continue to patch it together and live on. Patching together a life in another world from zero. So, time for a bit of analysis and theorising about this. As with the Kasaneru Greed IF, this one doesn't give us a conclusive ending. Will this Subaru manage to kill Reinhard, and if he does, will he realise that he still doesn't have the answers he's looking for? Will he die, return by death, and realise his save point has moved and none of the people he killed can be saved? Or will everything actually go according to plan, and he'll return by death to the save point where he first had amnesia with enough memories to keep going, only for a strange version of the rest of the story to play out where Subaru never finds out that he, in his amnesia form, was actually the victim of Rui Arneb, experiencing things for her with her witch factor inside him. Will he never learn, as this gluttony version of Subaru did in the real Arc 6 from Natsuki Subaru's own Books of the Dead, that the Subaru he seeks was never a superhero, just an older and more experienced version of the same flawed person from another world he is, who'd achieved all he had only by keeping on going and by needing to save those he wanted to save? We'll never know. It's an interesting story though. As I said in my video about Scarf Donna and Echidna, it's very much a theme in Arc 6, whether memories make a person. And here in this Ifrit, which is very much an extension of the arc, we can see this come up again. But the flaw is, he's trying to patch together a person from other people's memories and experiences. Kinda like that guy was trying to do with his daughter in the crap plot of the Sword Art Online Ordinal Scale movie. You know, where he thought he could piece together his daughter from memories of people who might have vaguely known her for 2 years, rather than, say, his own memories as her dad. But let's not talk about Ordinal Scale and its idiot plot now or ever again. Still though, did it never occur to anyone just not to play it, and to just slap the device off Asuna's head when it started making her lose her memories? It was so stupid. Anyway, yes, Subaru sees no way to get his own memories back, and only this way, very much similar to the way the archbishops of gluttony eat people, only more murdery, to properly know other people's memories of him. When he considers doing this in the normal plot, he's more concerned with reading the books of the people in his party because he was paranoid and wanted to know if he could trust them, rather than because he saw it as a viable way to get his own memories back. But you can see how after having the experiences of people like Beatrice and Emilia, and how full of things about Subaru they are, he may start to think of this as the solution to his amnesia. And yet, by only seeing Subaru through the eyes of people who know him, who also never experienced all of those other loops and deaths that the real Subaru did, he would never get the true picture. The plan is completely flawed for reasons this Subaru can't fathom. Still, as I've mentioned before in this video, we need to talk about who the Subaru who is the protagonist of this Ifrit is. He is the Subaru we spend quite a lot of Arc 6 with as the protagonist, but he's not quite the Subaru we know, or the Subaru who ends the arc. A lot of people thought that having Subaru develop amnesia partway through Arc 6 was going to be a bit of a disappointing gimmick and undo a lot of his development, but Tappei Sensei is not so cheap, and ultimately I know now that it's finished that a lot of people rate Arc 6 even more highly than Arc 4, which was previously pretty much universally accepted as the best arc of ReZero so far. But I'll be making videos about the end of Arc 6 this weekend. For now, let's just consider how the amnesia part actually worked, because that explains the Gluttony IF Subaru. Now in Arc 6, Subaru finds himself in a place called the Corridor of Memories after trying to read the Book of the Dead belonging to Reed Estrella. This book doesn't have Reed in it himself, because his memories are being used to reconstruct him. I won't go too into it because we're not here to recap all the wacky stuff going on in Arc 6, but that's why in this Ifrit, Subaru and Shaula talk about Reed, Reinhard's ancestor from 400 years ago, because Subaru has met this reconstructed version of him. It did not go well, but I'll leave it at that. Reading the empty Book of the Dead sends Subaru to this Corridor of Memories, which is where people's memories in this world are filtered off when they die, before their souls are basically recycled as new clean lives. Living here is the third Sin Archbishop of Gluttony, Rui Arneb. She has no true body and exists here only as a consciousness. She can't leave. Her thing is that she desires happiness, and in the same crazy way all the witches and Sin Archbishops have a particular insatiable need. Her brothers, the other Gluttony Sin Archbishops, Batenkaitos and Alphard, basically feed her the memories they eat from people so she can experience lives and look for happiness. Having done this with countless lives and never having been satisfied, she's obsessed with finding the perfect life. When Subaru first arrives here, to cut a long story short, she eats his memories, and yet Subaru doesn't lose them, probably for a similar, currently unknown reason to why he isn't necessarily affected by other authorities as much as other people. She can still explore them though, and she quickly realises that Subaru has memories nobody else she's seen has. Memories of his own death. She basically decides return by death would mean Subaru has the perfect life. She wants to experience it. She splits her consciousness into two and puts one part of herself into Subaru, eating him from the inside and discarding some of his memories. She kinda splits him into two people and tags along with her witch factor inside the amnesiac Subaru so she can experience life and death as him. She also wants to convince the amnesia Subaru that he and the original complete Subaru are completely different people, because if he truly splits in two, she'll be able to eat him a second time. Gluttonies can't eat the same person twice, but she really wants a second taste of him. She's therefore occasionally taken over amnesia Subaru's body, causing him to have blackouts where this other Natsuki Subaru does things like leave messages for him and murder Meili. So at the point where this if route splits off from the main story, Amnesia Subaru is carrying a version of Rui inside him as a kind of passenger and has the gluttony witch factor. He's also been kind of gaslit into thinking he's a very different person to the Subaru all his friends know, that he's not just a bit inferior because he doesn't have as much experience and doesn't remember how he knows them, but that he's literally a different person who's not the person they all want. I'm really speeding through what happens with Rui in Arc 6 in this explanation, just to give anyone watching this for spoilers the gist, but it's quite complicated and also very interesting how this all plays out in the arc. Still, it is really key to understanding just why Gluttony IF Subaru is so desperate to find out how to be OG Natsuki Subaru, why just carrying on without the memories and doing his best like we've seen people like Crush do is not an option. In the normal route, this Subaru is able to return to the corridor of memories and merge back with the memories Rui had taken out of him, also expelling her from inside him, leaving her traumatized by the experiences of death she's had on her vacation inside the hell that is being our boy. But here, well, maybe ultimately Rui will get her wish of making Amnesia Subaru so much of a different person that she can eat him again. Maybe that's how this would all end. So, what do you guys think about the Gluttony IF? Let me know in the comments, and once again, please subscribe if you want to see more ReZero content, as well as letting me know if there's a side story you especially want to see broken down like this. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again very soon.